They're just going to get water from downstairs.
Okay.
Do you think
I think it's nice. Yeah, I'm pretty nice.
Okay, let's see if we can open these ones.
Quite greasy.
Oh, no.
Like that. Or you want to close
So, thank you everyone for coming to this panel. Here we're with some activist groups and other groups in Montreal on campus. I'm going to start off by introducing everyone, and then I'll let everyone speak for themselves to introduce themselves to you all. Okay, so just to go in order. So here we have Patillo, who is one of the Mohawk mothers. The Mohawk mothers have been involved in an ongoing lawsuit with McGill and also other legal cases in Montreal. They're currently trying to see if there's potentially unmarked graves on the former land of the Royal Victoria Hospital. And then we have Mishama, who is here representing the Black Students Network, which is a crucial service on campus to aid Black students, to represent their voices, and then we have a representative from the Trans Patient Union, which is a critical service it's a byproduct of Cupid and Queer McGill. They serve like crucial healthcare mechanisms for trans students on campus. And we have a representative from SLEM, which is it's the Syndicat des Locataires de Montreal. Excuse my very butchered French. It's essentially a tenants union representing tenants' rights in Montreal, and they do a lot of mobilization efforts around campus housing. And then we have another Mohawk Mothers, Camineda, and so I will also, just because I've already introduced Mohawk Mothers, but I'll also let you all introduce yourselves.
Sevo, my name is Whitney O. Like she said, I'm very happy to be here with you all. It's nice to see all your faces, and with other activists too. I'd like to hear what they have to say along the lines of journalism and how we're going to handle things, and the shortcomings or the pluses and things that need to be addressed. I'm happy to be here with Bahana and Mishama and Onyx and Jonah.
Hi, I'm very pleased to meet you. My name is Mishama. I'm the president of the Black Students Network. The listener emergency service here on campus that caters to and advocates for the needs and interests of Black students. I'm really excited to talk about how they get to the
Hi, my name is Onyx. I work at the Trans Patient Union, which has already been pretty well explained. I do communications for our organization, and we do a lot of work here on campus for healthcare at the Wellness Hub, and we also do a lot of work off campus with other organizations in Montreal. We do a lot of projects like surveying and interviewing patients to gather and publish resources. One of our biggest things is we have like a public, basically just list and explanation of all kinds of different resources for trans healthcare in Montreal, and we also do other kinds of panel events from the city
I'm here representing Slam Matsuru, which is the Syndicat de Montréal, or the Montreal Thomas Tenants Union in English. And we are a group that advocates direct action on behalf of tenants across Montreal. We are not really, we often do the spiel to specify that we are not a legal aid clinic, and that we instead suggest that that people that join us and organize with us sort of take direct action against their landlords. And we have definitely had a lot of run-ins with the Montreal press, as well as cooperation with different forms of press. So I'm excited to talk more about that.
I'm pleased to be here and meet you. I like talking to young people, especially right now at this point. There's a lot of interest in what we're doing, so I'd like to explain some of it to you. What I did was this morning, I wrote my speech, and then I found out we're not even going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about other things. So if you want to hear it, let me know. I'm glad to do it.
Sorry, I'm just gonna steal the mic from you guys for a second. It's working.
Testing.
Okay, amazing. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. So I have a few questions prepared for us today, just talking about different media representations in alternative media and big media. So I can I'll start off with the first question. Okay, so what kind of media representations are you and your respective groups used to? And whether it be your case with McGill, Black Stories, Trans Stories, tenants' rights, etc., and feel free to expand as much as you want.
There's a lot of mainstream media that likes to pretend they're covering us, like CTV and City News and like bigger CBC and such. They come and they have this big long conversation, and the journalists are really, really interested. But when they get back to their office, show 5 seconds of what we actually did, and the full message doesn't get across. And I believe it, just for myself, I believe it's more the shareholders or the people that are backing the company. It's their interest that gets what they want put out there and not the full truth, which in many lines is almost like lying. So we have that type of media covering. We have like the Tribune, and the Tribune puts everything out there, and it's more cohesive, and it's not choosing sides, it's just putting the facts out there. And I think that's journalistic responsibility, and it's that integrity isn't everywhere. So I find that smaller, more concentrated audiences is like what we like to participate in, because it puts the full story in there. I have a cousin who wants to write a song. He's a songwriter, and he's an artist, and he's based out of like the Carolinas. And he said that's another coverage that he wants to write something and check in with our group and see if it's okay, and if it goes along lines with what we're feeling and such. Another thing is, Gohandineta just told me yesterday that somebody contacted her and they wanted to make like a documentary series on us. And we've had that. We've had a couple of people that we're close with, but they don't have like the funding to get it all done, so it's hard for them to spend some time on it. But they're just constantly getting footage and keeping their journals up and such, so they can create in that way. And that's a way to give a long, in-depth story. So in terms of like magazines and such, I don't think I've seen any coverage in that way. But I see that coverage when you have a concentrated, I find that that's very important, because then a whole community can grow to an understanding, and that community can branch out. So I love the Tribune because of that, because they listen and they put it out there. They're not making a decision on how they feel. They're doing their journalistic integrity, and they're making people think. That's what's important to me.
I think in terms of BSN, it's a little bit different because over the years we've become so McGill focused. I think like all the students here know how easy it is to get kind of caught up in the McGill level, and that's amplified when you're not from Montreal. And so many of the Black students are not from Montreal. So we're kind of here on campus trying to create community for those students. So most of the press that we get is from school papers, like the Tribune. And in my experience, that has also been a very positive experience. Just trying to share our activities and our message and capturing the spirit, which can be very difficult because we do a whole lot of different things. But I think with the BSN, it's mainly been a thing of like describing our relationship to students as opposed to describing the BSN, if that makes sense. So when I look back in our archives, I see a lot of work that's been done in the school papers that discusses like community events that we've done, projects, changes that have been made in the school that are in part due to BSN's activism. And at different points in time, that's been positively received by the school or negatively received by papers. But like right now, I would say that BSN is so McGill focused, for better or for worse. I mean, BSN is such a McGill thing that we kind of get missed by the greater Montreal community. So even events like last year, for example, where we collaborated on this protest for a young man that was killed while being illegally detained at Bordeaux prison. That was it was an initiative that was started outside of the school that I was part of and that I brought to the BSN. But I don't think that when CTV and CBC and all the other papers and journalism sources were talking about it, that they really understood the student aspect of it, right? Even though it started right here at our gates. That wasn't captured at all. And there's like a weird tension that I see also, and I think it just comes from like a general fear of student activism. People don't like students that speak up. It's scary, and there's a lot of power in student activism. So I feel that when it comes to sources that are not campus-based, there is like a minimization, if you could say, of our work and our activities. I don't know if that makes sense.
All right. Well, thank you for these great responses so far. I think, well, okay, there are multiple ways I can answer this. First of all, speaking just directly to my organization, the TPU is a very new organization. We've only really gotten stuff started like in the past year. And in this, like even in this semester that we're currently in, we've really been growing our membership and extending our efforts a lot. So we don't have as much experience with like larger media coverage as some of these other organizations might have. But we've been definitely, I think, engaging in a lot of initiatives with kind of like small and more local news. I know our like president or main administrator was interviewed by CKUT, which I'm also an active member of. I know they were participating in this panel earlier in the day, but for anyone who doesn't know, a local radio that is affiliated with McGill, just across the way, close by. And so
I mean, definitely as a member of that organization myself, I have a radio show. I talk about trans stories quite frequently. I think in general that is important to, I think that's also part of why we tend to engage with smaller, more specific news organizations, regardless of the fact that we're kind of still a small new organization, is because then we can actually get our stories told by people who understand us more. With big news, especially nowadays, when we're talking about trans stories, and especially trans healthcare, there's this whole culture war going on in Canada and the US that a lot of the big news coverage is really embroiled in. You know, I mean, I'm sure everyone has seen things about things happening in the States, things happening here, the Quebec government and other provincial governments trying to really make things worse for trans people in terms of healthcare and in terms of everything. And when big national organizations report on this stuff, it gets really wrapped up in this, and the nuances of a lot of things are kind of lost, I think. And I think the rest of the members of my organization would agree with that. So when we engage with more local activism and more local reporting, we can really get into the nuances of what our stories actually are and what is actually really going on. Because, you know, when things get into this larger, more corporate sphere, everything just gets so wrapped up in like politics and more right-wing beliefs and this kind of like back and forth of people, you know, debating, really just debating human rights with something that, from my perspective, really it's not even a debate. But then when we can tell our own stories, you know, we can really put out there like, hey, this is what we need, this is what's happening, this is what's going on. And we have engaged in a lot of protest. I think that's what a lot of our coverage has been, especially in like this past year. Obviously in the fall there were a lot of protests run by trans organizations in Montreal. A lot of it has been campus-based. And I think that really is important to be doing those things that kind of get media attention and really center the story around the people involved in it and not centered around some kind of like, you know, culture war political issue that just kind of loses the real meaning of why this is important. We've been, obviously our main thing is healthcare, so we do a lot of stuff about that. I think for things like that, it's also maybe like a mainstream news article isn't necessarily the right platform. We've done a lot of workshops, and we obviously publish our own content. That is becoming a large way that we've been kind of publicizing ourselves, is just by creating our own content. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a big resources index for healthcare in Montreal. We also recently started publishing a monthly newsletter that anyone can subscribe to. That was just started this past month, which is another big way that we're hoping to be able to talk about events happening in Montreal, not just our resources, but also things that other people are doing. There's a lot of other trans organizations that are protesting and talking about all kinds of things, whether it's healthcare or issues with legal identification. Yeah, so I think that's the general gist of what I have to say on that. I definitely agree with some of the stuff that has been said earlier, that it's really important when the stories are centered on the people involved in them and you really get to hear the whole story, not just what some other reporter has decided is the most politically correct thing to publish about it.
Okay, so in regard to SLAM, I think that we've been covered by larger outlets like CTV and CBC. Like CBC, I think like roughly once a year will hit us up to do like the morning hour, and I remember that was one of my early on in my involvement with the union. I was on the CBC like 7 a.m. show, and I remember thinking of that as a pretty positive experience with a major journalism outlet where they gave me a lot of room to talk about what the union was doing and to talk about it at a time when people were commuting to work, which is sort of like a perfect audience for that kind of content. But since then, I've also done a lot of interviews with similarly large outlets that sort of want to dig into the fact that we broadcast ourselves as a direct action organization, and all they want to talk about is whether we have broken the law, who has broken the law, and can I give them names of people in videos. And I have had to sort of really strong arm reporters into focusing on what's actually like on the actual story, because it's a lot of really just wanting to basically do the police's work for them of identifying us, which is really disappointing. I think that a way that journalism could better aid us, and sort of that is truer to what journalism as a form of expression does, is to question, to think about the story from all sides and to question whether the laws that are pertinent to the story are just, and to interrogate the landlords as much as they do the tenants, because in the city when you see tenants that are dissatisfied, there may be like a sentence or two in the article about why they might be unhappy, but not a lot more than that. So I think that the stories could definitely be a lot more well-rounded, and when we're approached by, or when we approach small media outlets, we tend to have a much better experience with that, I'm happy to say. So yeah, it's the media loves kind of, I think the reason that we get quite a bit of media attention is because we're combative, and cutting in and out, I'll try to talk loud. That they like that we are we present the opportunity of a very fiery headline, but I find that sometimes the journalists we deal with are not willing to dig deeper into the underlying context of whatever it is that happened.
So, I've been running a website for over 30 years, almost 35 years. And it's called Mohawk Nation News. And I write the stories. And I have a couple of gimmicks there that make people read it. For one thing, I do put those kind of gimmicky titles. And then at the end, I summarize my story by putting a song at the end. And now people remember the story because of the song, not so much what I wrote, but they go back to it. So we're talking about thousands of articles that I've done over the years. And I don't have any sponsors. Everything is out of my pocket, whatever it costs, I pay for it. But there are people who like the way that I do things. I write about politics, I write about all kinds of things, but they send it out to other people all over the world. So I get responses from people. And what surprises me is how much is suppressed in the press here in Canada. Just today, I got an article about the Duplessis orphans, a really great article. And it wasn't anywhere in Canada. It's happening right here on the doorstep. And this is a horrid story. And so it was published, and this came from Germany. The person who sent it to me. Did you know about this? Anyway, so I don't know why that is. Who decides whether to put such an important story aside and not put it in? So what I did was I got it and I sent it out. I just posted it. It went all over. It went to the States, it went to South America, and then they posted it and so on. Some translated. I know it's translated in France, things like that. But anyway, I started this because we were not being heard, and we still aren't. So I had to push Mohawk Nation News and keep putting out stuff as often as I can when I have the time. So I'll do a story, and if there's a really good article that came out, I'll republish it. And people thank me very much for finding some of these stories that they can't find. You know, the one that about the Duplessis orphans. Why was it all over Europe and not here? It's right here. Who decides to not put that in an important story like that? Who makes that decision? You know? How does that happen? I'd like to know. I'd like to know who our enemies are, so I can, you know, aim my arrow at them. But one of the things I remember doing quite a few years ago, 2007, I think, or 6, we were fighting the Charlotte Lake issue of the Algonquins. There was a lot of stuff going on there. And nobody would write anything about them. And it was a very important issue about uranium mining and so on. It was really, really a big issue. And then I said, I didn't know what to do. How do I get attention? So I went through all of the companies there that are involved with it. I went through who is the president, who is the vice president, who's this, and I went through the whole thing and put their names down. I said, these are the people that are holding back these stories. They're sitting on them and they're not letting the public know what's going on. And it's not random. It's very, if you look at the list, it's on purpose. So you can see that there are some bosses there. So these papers that you're involved in are very, very important. Actually, I don't know what we would have done without your interest in what we're doing. We certainly, didn't get the mainstream. They'd come, they'd interview us for maybe a couple of minutes, but they wouldn't show anything. So there was nothing on the mainstream media. And then you go around and you talk to people, they never heard of anything about what the Mohawk mothers are doing here. It's a big issue. It's gone all over the world. And, but not in Quebec, not in Canada. It's being suppressed here. And people in, people in other parts of the world are reading this. And they will write and then they'll spread it out. I'm just wondering, is there any way that we can get around this? Is there something we can do? Because they do, they do have the, they have the money, the force, whatever. They're sitting in certain jobs and they're able to shut us up and so on. How do we get around that? Does anybody have any ideas? That's what I'd like. That's why I'm here. I want to know what to do. Because we do have something that, Mohawk Mission News has been going for a long time. And I have my grandson now helping me. He's got some ideas. He's 17 years old. He's got some good ideas. And he knows more about running, using the computer and so on. More than I do anyway. But he sees that, oh, you're missing this, or you should do this. I can't learn any of that. People like myself can't learn all that stuff. But you know how to do all that. You are experts at it. And you can use it better, much better. And it needs everybody to help out. You can't depend on one person to do it. Like in my case, it was just me. So I sit there and write. Sometimes I'm writing every day of the week and I'm exhausted. But these stories need to get out. So how do we entice people to help? That's the question. I'd like to know that. If you have ideas, let me know.
Some water.
has a bit to do, it's kind of around the same idea. Is this? So, in terms of solidarity with other movements, whether it be Indigenous Palestinian solidarity or Black trans solidarity, how do you believe the media depicts those kind of intersectional interactions that you have with other groups? Do you think you get stronger coverage, or do you think you get more suppressive coverage when it comes to things like that?
When we support every day the Palestinians, but I wasn't worried about me getting coverage. I was just worried about Palestinians at that point. And I wanted them to know that we understand them. And I think just having them know that we understand what they're going through and we're willing to support them, that's what we were there for. I guess where I sit, I don't really see if it gives us more support. That wasn't my intention. I just knew that I just knew we had to be there. That's because there's such similarities with us, and it's like they're between a rock and a hard place. Like, we were just speaking of this, like, I don't like it when people speak and they say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. All we can do is rally together and support. There's got to be some way that we can have an impact. So I don't like to speak like that. That's what I was trying to explain to her, that I don't like to say, well, geez, you know, well, what can you do? You know, like I can't handle that kind of talk. It's like I'm constantly on a trajectory of what, even if it's the smallest little thing that'll impact somebody, we're trying to come up with a way that we can do that. Because for us, we knew where we had to put our foot down, and and everybody says, well, what are you gonna do about it? You can't stop them. They're a big company. They're, you know, it's $1 billion project. And, you know, like, what are you gonna do? And I'm like, no, we can. And I think trying to give the Palestinians shed light on how Wehumwe we're doers. Like, let's stop complaining and just do something, right? So we just did it. And if I gotta go up there and stand in front of a tractor or a bulldozer, that's what my grandparents did. And that's how you got your way. And that's how you got support from people. And so I'm not telling them to do that. I'm just saying that, like, I'm trying to think of a way for them as well to, because they are us. They are us. They're human. And this is happening to them. And it just so happens they all live in a part of the world. But if we don't do something about it right now, that could be us. You know, so, but I don't know if I look at it like if it helped our support. I don't look at it like that. I just wanted to support them. I needed to be there, and even if that's a small part, if it gives them more people who are following us, if it gives them more followers, then great. That's how I look at it.
I think for me, when I'm trying to understand the portrayal of solidarity in the media, my point of departure is always an understanding that our movements are considered a threat to national security and are therefore not welcome or embraced. So when it comes to Black and Indigenous or Palestinian or queer and trans solidarity, and even before solidarity, just individually as movements, which are inherently intersectional because our identities already overlap. I have actually no expectation of support from, at the very least, big media, because we're not welcome. Right? We're not supposed to be here. We're not supposed to be thriving in the ways that we've managed to. So, yeah, because I've been thinking about this a lot, especially this year, of course, and thinking of the ways in which
our histories are erased in these conversations, our histories of solidarity, our histories of working together, even on this campus, how Black students and Palestinian students have historically worked together to help create change. I think it's a threat. There's no other way to see it, and who likes a threat? So, what am I trying to say? Yeah, I think it's kind of like just understanding that at the root, already inherently we live on this we're observed on this continuum of deservedness, and fundamentally, let's say Blackness, that gives you nothing. Because what do we deserve? What does the media give us? I know in my experience, when it comes to deserving peace in your death, when it comes to deserving the benefit of the doubt, when it comes to deserving respect, that's not afforded on the basis of Blackness. I'll never forget the way that the video of Eric Garner's murder was replayed non-stop. And I mean, I sat there for 10 minutes watching it over and over until I had to scream at my grandparents to turn it off because everyone in the room was crying because we watched someone get murdered. And that's a norm. And that's a norm that's inherent to our system because the media is part of the system. And racism is institutionalized, right? And I agree that solidarity should not be based on this idea of what are we getting out of it. I think to me, solidarity is based on the idea that there's no way for anybody to be free until everyone is free. How can I be free as a Black person when Palestinians are oppressed, when within my own community, queer and trans rights go ignored, and queer and trans voices are ignored continuously? It's just impossible. And it's not just, I think we theorize it a lot, but like literally, is Canada not supplying arms to all of these places right now? And is Israel not training cops in the US? I mean, St. Louis, where Michael Brown was killed, their chief of police was trained by the Israeli police training program. That's literal ties, that's literal money, literal thinking, literal physical presences that are exchanged. So when it comes to our portrayals of solidarity, it's usually done in a way that is meant to undermine bonds. And I know email is not like, email is so not a form of journalism, but it's coming to mind right now because I'm thinking about, like, for example, the emails that we get from the school in the past few months to me, and the tactics that have been used with policing on the grounds. Those are ways that are fundamentally meant to undermine solidarity because they know that students of various backgrounds are already scared to come and show support because of fear of the school. But when you put police at a protest, you absolutely guarantee that students who are already scared are not going to show up. Black students are not going to show up. A lot of Palestinian Arab Muslim students are not going to show up. And everybody who like naturally and rightfully has a fear of policing is not going to show up. And so like this undermining is kind of just it's just institutionalized in ways that we can't even grasp, and I think it escapes us because it's everywhere. Like we're not meant to be working together. This group right here sitting together is totally not normal. And so yeah, I just have no reliance on like the media emphasizing or supporting that. And I think that's when we see groups like the ones here turning towards creating their own spaces. And I think all of our groups do that. That's what I'm hearing is like historically and presently, it's about creating your own spaces so that those bonds are forged and put out there, advertised, and like continue to grow. In the sense, like I don't know, for example, BSN also has historically been very involved with CKUT, whether it's our over 30 years of Black Talk during February, which used to be an entire day dedicated to Black programming. or the creation of soul perspectives by DSM members and humanities. Like, these are all moves that we make to institutionalize solidarity and to institutionalize representation so that we can, in our own way, undermine what is being done to counter those models.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with all of that. I think the main thing is, we know we are intersectional. We know we have solidarity at the Trans Patient Union, and well, we're a sort of working group that's a subset of Queer McGill, and so in this larger circle, there are members of our community that are involved in the Palestinian hunger strike at McGill, or that have been involved in organizing that or in participating in that. Even in like the same room that we use for our meetings and that we like do things in, they also come to this room to plan there. It's very interconnected. Also, referencing CKUT, I know there's a radio show there specifically for trans people of color, and they do great work there to, increase that solidarity, and really engage in that awareness of intersectionality. And I think, we all know that that is present, right? Like, there are, there are Black trans people, there are Arab queer people, there's solidarity with indigenous movements and Palestinian movements. All of these things are very interconnected. The big corporate media, doesn't really report or acknowledge on that, really hardly ever. I mean, if you're talking trans stories, so much of that is just so horribly sensationalized. You see things about, like, a trans person being murdered or killed or committing suicide or some other horrible thing happening, and it just turns into this sensationalized story of why trans children shouldn't have access to health care, or why, some mental health issue is present, and totally divorced even from just the reality of trans people, let alone any kind of solidarity. Like, they can't even acknowledge our actual stories just from a queer perspective. They're not going to acknowledge any other element of solidarity, whether it's with race or disability or ethnicity or anything else. But I think the important thing is that they're not going to do that. It would be great if they could, but we can do that, and we have the power to tell our own stories, which is why, local and activism-focused news and journalism initiatives are so important, because these are the spaces in which we can tell our own stories, and we can tell our stories that involve that intersectionality and that solidarity, and really bring that into the light. And hopefully these things can become, more known and more widespread, not in the sense that they will be picked up by more corporate media agencies, but in the sense that I think, at least from what I've observed being on campus, more people are starting to be aware of these things and being aware of alternative journalism and of all of the struggles faced by these different groups. And if we can get people to turn their attention away from the corporate sensationalism of a lot of mainstream media and towards people telling their own stories and people reporting on solidarity and intersectionality, that is really a step in the right direction. Because that's what's true, that's what's going on, and if we could get that to really be the center of what is being discussed and what is being talked about in these narratives, then that can be a step towards making progress, whether that's with organizing protests or just with what's in the general public consciousness.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk at length because I think that you guys mostly covered that, but I definitely think that the language of a threat was very apt, that like all of us represent groups or organizations that are a direct threat to the establishment and all part of a collective drive toward liberation. So I think that I agree with you completely that the media is not capable of wrapping their head around that, or maybe they are but don't want to, because that would pose a risk. I also just it has been kind of a frustrating day for me today on campus because the TAs are on strike, and all I am hearing about the strike from students, just like as I walk around, is like, it's so annoying that no one's going to grade my paper, and a lot of just very open, brazen setting of an intention to like break a picket line, be like, I have to go to this class, it's mandatory. And I think that it's really the job of like campus news to teach people the absolute basics of solidarity, because I find that on a highly privileged campus like McGill, that notion is entirely novel and missing. So I think that this is a good time, as good a time as any, to just teach people about the word solidarity.
When you're trying to get a point across, well, it's almost impossible, I find, unless everybody has some background of whatever the issue is, and they mostly don't. And so over the years, it's one of the things I've concentrated on, is to give a background. And if they follow it, and then I tell them, well, go to such and such an article. I go back 30 years, and people can follow the things that I've written about certain issues. And one of the things that I found out was it hasn't even changed. The issue is still there, and they suppressed it, but the people who read Mohawk Nation News, they're aware, they know those issues, and then I tell them, I'll go back and you'll see that I've already written about this. I don't need to write it again. Because that's another thing that happens when you're on these things. You're writing this the same thing, and you're using the same, same information, and just write it over and over and over again. So that's one of the things that you have to, because that'll wear you out. Because it's the same information, and people need to have it, but they don't go and start looking for things that have already been written about it, because it's not indexed, it's not set up in the correct way for somebody. Okay, you want to know about this, what it was written about back in, maybe 20, 25, 30 years ago. And then you tell them where it is and they find it. But then they don't want to, they're lazy to go looking for it. That's kind of hard too. But I'm just wondering if there's a difference. Maybe I should be changing my format. What I do is I put cartoons in there to entertain people. and then they read. It's a serious story, but I managed to put a little bit of light on it, and then I put a song with it. And so it's kind of a little playful from the way we look at things as Indigenous people. We find something funny about that story, and then we do it. One of the things that was popular that I did was I took the song "O Canada," and the word Canada comes from a Mohawk word "ganajam." And ganajam means squatters. That's what it means. And of course, we never told anybody about it, but recently we did. Of course, it didn't go over too good. But we see that they have, exposed themselves, and they show it everywhere. Everywhere you look, you see Canada, Ganajam. So I said, well, maybe I could take it even a little further. So what I did was I took the song and I rewrote the words. And then I sang it myself, actually. I found some music. And I put it in the background, and I put it out. Well, somebody put it out on YouTube. They take it on themselves to do these things. And so then other people get involved. They feel like they would like to get involved with this. So you kind of have to find ways for them to, because there's so many things that people send out. It would take you days to read some of this stuff. And, it's scholarly, it's good reading, it's good. I like reading that, but people, you have to find out what it is that will catch their eye. And that's what I've figured out. I don't know if anybody here has ever read Mohawk Nation should use, but that's what I do. And of course it helps me because I get through it myself. I'm thinking there, I'm sitting there late at night, what can I say about this? And then I do find a way to express something in the way from our perspective. And I think people are learning a little bit more about how we see things and how we identify. And they can get more, they can learn a bit more about how we express ourselves. And it is different. It's quite different. And sometimes I wonder, maybe, I should learn how to write the way they write. And then I said, but I can't. I still have to do it my way. So I keep on doing it my way. But there are people that know how to spread this information around. Like, they know the internet. I don't know any of that, but my 17-year-old grandson does. He says, Dota, I'm going to help you. So he goes through it all. You know what you should do with this Mohawk law, People's got to learn this Mohawk law. There's 117 articles. But you got to put it in a friendlier way. So he came up with a pretty good ideas. I said, okay, let's do it. And then he had me sitting there reading it, and he put a warrior, a camel on my head, and he put pictures in the back of the warrior flag, and so he had me sitting there, and he interviewed me, and then I explained it. And people really like it. It's kind of wacky. I wouldn't do that, but he did. So you need to maybe, like yourselves, you're all young. You have a different way of communicating, and accepting what other people say. So, maybe you should explore it. Some of the things I used to do was go all the way through and looking at, people that I think might be interested in reading this, and then I sit there and I just send it to them. And some of those people have been following Mohawk Nation News 20, 30 years now, because I just found it and I just sent it to them. So you have to be more active, I think. And, and it doesn't cost anything, it's just your time, of course. But I would suggest that that's one way, because there's people that are interested. There's people in Europe, there's people all over that you come across it and you take it on yourself, you just send it to them. You say, just thought you might be interested in this, and then you just send it. And you find out they actually become very interested in it. So, and if you want to spread that word around, like myself, I sent it to Venezuela. Well, there's a guy down there now. He gets it, he translates it into about 7 languages, and then he sends it all over. Now, I don't know who he is, but people do get it and they read it. So, if you start sort of looking at the world as just really one place for all of us, you might, just show them something, tell them something, and suddenly they become interested in that. And then they want to know. I notice sometimes if I don't put anything out, they start writing to me, what happened? Are you in jail or something? But it's PR, public relations they have to do. And it's just your time. It's just your own self. And you have the ideas, well, try it out. And I think that, I'm not sure, but that's what I do. I'm just giving you some of my ideas. Sometimes one of the things I did was the unions. Okay, the unions are of the people, right? But nobody ever gets in touch with unions. You start sending them that stuff. You start reading it and say, hey, these are, they're people of the, we're supposed to be taking care of in our charters. It says we're supposed to take care of children, men, women, widows, orphans, and so on. And so I say, hey, this is very interesting, So then they get very interested in our issue. And then eventually, they invite you and say, we're having a meeting, we're having a convention. Would you like to come over and just listen to what we're doing and so on. So it's just PR, public relations. You just got to use that to get your message out, because that's the whole idea. behind everything we're doing right here, right now. So we're trying to get our message out, and our message is very important. But you have to start, trying different ways. I'm sure you have a better imagination than I have, but you can. If you want, you can write all you want, but if nobody reads it, then what, it's for nothing. You're wasting your time.
I took something from what she was saying, and I see it, but I love it when someone else brings it to the surface for me, because then you can address it like right on. When she spoke of the fear, and a lot of times the establishment, yes, they are worried that the masses are going to have this information, that they're going to have the truth, and then they're going to make their own decision on what they feel or what they think is right and wrong. Well, I think, I'm not going to tell journalists what to do, but I think it's important. Well, right now, some friends of mine and myself, we are bringing back the People's Voice. It was a newspaper that used to be, it was on a mailing list, and that's how you get the newspaper. And they used to have it in Akwesasne. And so now we're bringing it out. But what we understand in our small community is the fear within ourselves. Because a lot of our people have lost through residential schools, through not just residential schools, schooling, everywhere you go, the way you're treated and such, we've lost a lot of our ways. We've had to adapt or fit in or whatever. And there's only a small portion of people that have the original understandings and the original information. And even our own people are worried to back us because they don't even fully understand what we're doing, and they're wehwe as well. So that fear exists on both sides of the newspaper, or both sides of the media. So in the People's Voice, what we decided to do, it's a newspaper geared to voice wehwe issues and what people have to say. And we're going to publish things of people who don't agree and do agree, but we need to get it out there so it creates conversation. But what we're doing is we're writing a glossary, and every edition or volume or whatever, they just ask me for content. I don't know how it works, but every time we're putting out a glossary of what this means. What does this word, when we use this word, what does it really mean? What is the background of it? Because let's take, I don't know how to explain it from my point, like, I guess I'm too enveloped in the People's Voice, but let's just say, like, what she's representing or what they're representing, I would participate in it more if I wasn't afraid of offending someone. If I had like a terminology of what you really mean when you're saying this, or what you really mean when you're saying that, and where it comes from. Like the Palestinians, I have an understanding to a certain degree, but I don't like to make assumptions. And I would love to sit down with, when I was in school before, my friend was Palestinian, and she would here and there tell me what her family was going through. And this was like 20 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, yeah. And she would tell me what they're going through and such, but at the same time, I was still so young that I was trying to understand myself, about myself. And so I wasn't so, well, tell me, like I had a child. It was like, I was so trying to navigate myself through my life that I didn't bother to go in depth about her life. Now I really, really want to know, like, what is your past from your point of view and your experience? Not what, if I look it up on the internet, what they're going to tell me. When I look up Mohawks on Wikipedia. It's terrible. It's awful. You know, like, really, this is what the greater of the world thinks that we're all about? Like, this is terrible. So, I understand that journalists have their, they do their journalistic job of evoking thought by giving facts, but at the same time, it's almost like the people who are reading the papers, yes, we have a full life and we have like for instance, you're all in school and you have so much. Sometimes I would like a newspaper to kind of be not, like I want it to be thought, like evoke thought, but at the same time, I want it to calm me down. I want to read to be calmed down, to say I was given a fact, like a concrete information, and like almost given definitions. Like maybe I'm talking baby class because it's been a long time since I've been to college, but I think on a smaller scale, like in my community, it's really important that I put out there, like I'm literally doing a glossary of what our own terminologies are, because some people would start reading an article of ours and be like, well, I don't know what that means. They're just skimming through it to skim through it and say they read it and just be like, well, I don't know, and carry on. I would love it if, well, that's what we're doing. We're putting a glossary so they can understand it. It's kind of like, it's not dumbing it down. It's informing at a level where people are comfortable of absorbing it. I think that's important too.
Thank you all for those answers. Those were amazing. We have like 13 minutes left, so I'm going to ask a very quick question. How do you think media can go about fostering trust with your respective communities?
Oh, I think you just have to tell the truth. That's what we're searching for, and everybody's looking for the truth. So they want to read something, they want to know that that's the truth. They know when they look at Mohawk Nation News, even if it hits you in the forehead, they know that whatever I say is the truth. And I think you have to have a reputation that you're going to tell the truth and not be afraid to. And I'm very direct. And sometimes they're upset over it, but basically that's what they expect from me. And I wrote something before I left here. I said, oh, they're expecting me to say something. Oh. Anyway, so I did write some. I just read the first paragraph here. I called it No Redemption. And there's no redemption, no forgiveness for the genocide of indigenous people on Turtle Island. We're all suffering from the killings of our people, so the settler colonialists can benefit. This land has always been ours, and no one has ever defeated us, and we have never surrendered. Whose land is this? Ours. That's what, at the rallies. The genocide is so well planned, so no one can ever be charged. Creation remembers, though, and we are part of creation. We loved and laughed before as a people. This society carefully smothered our true selves. We did not pretend happiness. They tried to make us crave and yield to their hierarchical order. They planned how to force us to go deeper into their way, or else we were eliminated. They accuse us of being psychotic because we crave freedom. They took everything away and gave us nothing. The law of the land has to persist. That is all that is sustainable. A system where the top 1% is taking 99% of the money, profits, and benefits is toxic and unsustainable. They never stop until creation is going to stop them. They are coming after us again, and we keep trying to lure us back into subservience. But our resistance is going to change the history of the world.
So that's
That's the kind of stuff I write. And anyway, the rest of it. But anyway, as I said, it's very direct, and they know that I will write very direct. They know that. So that's what they expect. And I don't pussyfoot around, and I don't sweeten it or anything. I just say direct, because it's a pretty horrible issue that we're dealing with. We're living this. We're not even through it. We're in the middle of it right now. And the question I ask is, you're going to find out what you are sitting here benefiting from. You're going to find that out. It's going to come to you. You're going to find it all out. I'm interested in knowing how you're going to feel when you find that out, and what you're going to do. That's one of the questions. And if somebody is writing about that, I'm going to read it. I don't know which paper is writing it or who's writing it, but that's what I'm interested in. I want to know what you're going to do when it hits you.
That's direct.
Yes.
Yeah, that was amazing, first of all. That was great writing. And so I just wanted to add to that, if we're talking like what can media and journalists do, I think there are two main things that maybe haven't been brought up so far. One of them being more journalists reporting on issues that are actually, the journalists are actually members of the communities they're talking about, right? I know this, I think this is an issue for all of our communities and struggles here, that so many times the big news stories will be written from the perspective, of the people in power, of the, straight white men that are always telling the stories. And even if they, are a good intention, that still is never going to be as true as someone from our community telling our story. That is always going to be the truest account and the most, not just true in terms of facts, but also true to the nature of the issue, and the most respectful. And so I think if there are, and if there can be more journalists, more diverse journalists reporting, I think that is really important to further all of these issues. And the other thing is, I think, to just generally have a more human perspective on things. I can speak obviously for trans people. It feels like the only time people ever really talk about trans people in the news is when something bad happens. Everybody talks about it when a trans person has been killed, or, some state or province is passing some law to outlaw healthcare, or there's some problem with legal identification, or something is being banned, or something is being restricted, or somebody has been in some way harmed. And I think that alone is really problematic, because it reduces everything about our community and our lives to just these bad things, and it just furthers this whole cycle of, debating the existence of trans people, which is really not what, that's not what this should be centered around. And so if media and news could, talk about trans stories in a more human way, right? If a tragedy does happen, it shouldn't be talked about in this sensationalist, this person was murdered and it's this whole story, and there are two sides of the issue. There's no two sides of the issue. Tell the story like it's about a person who has a life, who deserves to be treated like a human. And also talk about our people when tragedies don't happen. Talk about good things and positive things and advancements, and also just people living their lives and, making achievements in all kinds of ways. Reframe the whole narrative to not just be one of, oppression and debate and, tragedy and violence, but one of people who are human just like anybody else, that have lives just like anybody else. That is really what is needed to reframe all of these issues.
Thank you to both of you. That was
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is that also there's this need for the media to become comfortable being uncomfortable with what we tell them. Because exactly like you said earlier, we can talk to an hour to a reporter and they will be eating up what we're saying, and then 5 seconds of what we say gets put out there because that is what is in line with their overall messaging. And there's just this fundamental need to be comfortable with the fact that the truth is probably not going to align with whatever sources try to say. And that also, this whole thing of how are we telling stories and which stories are we putting out there. And I think that's just a deeper reflection of how we see people from all these communities that are represented today, but other ones in our society, right? Like, are we seeing folks as victims or people who only exist in certain circumstances? Or do Black and Indigenous and queer and everybody exist just literally as people? Where are we? Why is it that if I'm opening the news, the only Black stories that I'm seeing are tragedies? Where is the representation? And yeah, I think that's just like kind of like a rewiring, it's a rethinking of what the media is supposed to represent and whose stories it's supposed to tell, because even when we are reached out to for our stories, even then it feels very transactional. Media is very transactional. I think the February that just passed was like a great reminder of that, because I have never gotten more requests for anything BSN related in the news. And it's dead silent now.
February 29th.
February 29th came this year, and after that it was like crickets. So there, like, that transactional nature also just needs to be rethought so heavily. Even other initiatives, CBC's Real Talk on Race, for example, which featured stories from like various pockets of the Black community. One example being like my family as Ethiopian Jews, what does that mean? Or like the more recent mini documentary series, I'm trying to remember the name, but it's like on race in Canada, telling stories in relation to like sports, activism, student activism, talks a lot about Montreal, different facets of the Black community. Like, it's out there, but we can only say so much. And I have a strong feeling that a lot of what was said is not included, because you can only be radical to a certain extent, and only certain truths can be said. And like the hunger strikers right now, I have a lot of things to say about that, but the hunger strikers, like the media portrayal right now is so telling. I think it was a CTV clip that they posted, and besides the fact that the way CTV reported was so untruthful, the greater issue is that the person talking literally could not like put out a coherent sentence, because you just can't spew bullshit clearly. Like, your mouth will not let you. It's not possible. And this is what I think I see a lot, is like, yeah, you can try to say whatever you want to say, but like at the end of the day, when you cannot even put together a coherent sentence because the truth is not what's coming out, then there's like a fundamental rethinking that needs to be done.
I also just want to add a logistical idea, which is that I would love to see a lot more journalists actually present at the events that are unfolding that they're going to be reporting about. And my suggestion of how to do that is like to maintain these connections that brought us here today, the connections between small journalism and local activism, so that if something's going to happen, we can tip you off and you can be there. Because I think that just being able to say, to go back to what you said about trust, being able to say, we saw it, this is what happened, and also include interviews, I think that's the best way to tell the whole of the story. That's all I wanted to say. Sorry.
I just wanted to say, I love the Tribune.
That's excellent. We only have so much. I like to talk. Okay. No, just.
Okay, well, it is 5:30, so I think we're gonna wrap up now, but we do have half an hour until the next panel, so feel free to come up and talk to our lovely panelists. And thank you all for coming, and thank you for your super insightful answers. We really appreciate it.
introductions. So maybe Gabrielle, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Gabrielle Drolet. I am a writer and a cartoonist. I'm based here in Montreal. I'm a cartoonist for The New Yorker and the Globe and Mail, and I've been a freelance journalist for about 5 years now. I cover culture and disability for a range of publications. I used to work at Coast and Halifax, and I've worked with The New York Times, The Globe and Mail, Vice, a bunch of, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And Nora, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I've been a freelance journalist for a long time now. I guess probably about 14 years officially. As a freelancer, I do write for whoever hires me, and that really does change all the time. With the walls closing in on all of us in Canadian media, it seems to be fewer and fewer options every week. But I am based in Quebec City, so I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you here tonight. And I always forget to mention this, but I am also a podcaster and have a podcast that you may have heard of called Sandy Nora Talk Politics. And that is the heavy lifting of my political analysis work, whereas my journalism work tends to appear more in print.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, I want to quickly mention, Nora mentioning podcasting reminded me, I'm a fact checker as well. I'm a fact checker for a podcast company. That's like most of the work I do. I can't believe I forgot to mention it. That is crazy.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we can just move into some questions, and then after we finish with our questions, we can move to maybe having a bit of a discussion with the room. So first of all, a lot of people would like to learn about how to get into freelancing, but they're not totally sure how. The barrier can feel quite high. So I was wondering, maybe we'll start with Gabrielle and then move to Nora for the rest of the time. What do you think are the best ways for young journalists who might only have experience working at student papers to enter the field of freelancing?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think that freelancing and journalism can feel so opaque when you're first starting out. I'm curious to hear, Nora, like what your background is and how you started as well. But for me, I was a student journalist at the Western Gazette, and I never went to journalism school. I think for a while I wanted to, but while I was at the Gazette was when I first started pitching. I don't know if the Tribune is the same, but at the Gazette we were very limited in that we only published stories directly about Western. And I started wanting to write things that were, more broadly about Ontario or broadly about student life. And yeah, I started pitching, and it very quickly turned into like one article after the other. And in the beginning they were often like unpaid or like really, really poor pay. I didn't know better, so I was like, okay, that works. But I think, looking back, a big piece of advice I had was just to pitch, right? And to pitch, I used to make the mistake of pitching, like, Vice, not that that's a relevant example anymore, but Vice at submissions.com, or Walrus at submissions.com. And it took me a long time, because no one told me to realize that actually you have to find the specific editor you want to, right? Find the email address of the editor of the culture section or the health and wellness section or whatever it is, and email them and pitch them something that shows them you've read the publication and that you're familiar with the kind of work they publish. And then you pitch and you say, I had experience working at the Tribune, and maybe they don't answer. You can follow up. If they still don't answer, edit the pitch, pass it along elsewhere. And I think it can feel really invasive and weird in the beginning. You're like, oh, I'm bothering this person and whatever. But I think most of freelance journalism in the beginning is just like emailing people and not knowing if they'll answer you, not knowing if they're taking pitches, but you just have to put yourself out there in a way that can feel very uncomfortable.
That's really great. Nora, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So I was forced into freelancing due to a whole bunch of different life circumstances. The primary life circumstance that I moved to Quebec City, and I left editing a newspaper at Toronto Metropolitan University, which was not the Ryerson or the Eye-Opener. It was called the Ryerson Free Press, and it was more of a magazine-style publication that was published by the Continuing Education Students Association of Ryerson, but we had a real kind of like broad look at things, and someday I'll write about all the amazing things that the journalists that came through the Ryerson Free Press actually went on to doing, because we have some pretty amazing alumni in that little group before it was shut down by conservatives who sued us out of existence, and the publisher got scared and whatever. And so I find myself in Quebec City, and big surprise, there's no English media here. The English media here is CBC, and despite having a very good reference in the world of CBC radio, like literally the guy in charge of English language news programming didn't even get a call back. And I have journalism. Well, that's not true. The School of Journalism at Ryerson would say I have a journalism degree. It's not true, but they're very cute. They say that I actually finished my degree, but I did not. And it didn't matter because I knew how to work a soundboard, and it's a tiny community here, and there's no options, and we're always pulling people from Montreal who don't really know what Quebec City is, blah, 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 and I didn't get a call back. So it was very clear from the beginning that I'd have to go freelance. I think that Gabriella? Sorry.
Gabrielle. Or
Gabrielle's
Gabby.
pitch advice is wonderful. That's exactly right. The thing that I think is probably just as important, which can be very, very difficult because it's a little bit of a chicken and egg question, is developing your craft. And you have to be good if you're going to get that pitch. It's not just about the idea. It's you really do have to be a good writer. And becoming a good writer takes a lot of writing. So you have to also find ways to have that writing practice. Sometimes it means you're writing for yourself. Sometimes you might be blogging. Sometimes you might be doing like work for someone that you hate, but you're at least practicing the skill of writing. Maybe it's research skills. Maybe it's you're doing a master's degree and you're like, I'm gonna try to do things on the side while I develop my own skills. Because you have to have the skills to be able to get the job. And the really sad reality right now is there's so many people who are freelance that it really is a brutal world out there because there's just no options. Like I wrote a feature for Chatelaine and it was like, well, that's the only feature I'm going to write for them for 3 years. Because how many features do they actually commission? Like, maybe 30 in 2 years? They're not going to give me more than one if there's other journalists that are around that also have the opportunity to write, So it can be really tough, and I just saw someone who is trying to navigate the world of freelancing and pitching, and this is someone who had a full career in the mainstream media, and they were like, I'm just not used to doing this on my own. I'm not used to actually having the resources and the world of a newsroom behind me, and it's like, it sucks. It really does suck. It's a total grind, and as much as I, recognize that I do it, so it sucks, but it's possible, and I love it, and it's a great world, and if CBC called me tomorrow to say, hey, you want to host the afternoon show here, I would be like, probably not. Actually, I have a really great life, and I don't really want to, fuck that up. But it's a weird world out there, and a lot of people are making their own thing, which is another way to get into freelancing, which is fuck everything else out there and make your own thing.
Incredible advice. Okay, thank you so much. I have a follow-up question because you recommended spending a lot of time honing your craft, and I think that something that a lot of people struggle with in that process while also facing rejection and trying to improve is the issue of burnout. And I was wondering if you, maybe starting with Gabrielle, if you have any advice on how to deal with burnout while you are trying to improve as a writer and, create interesting pitches and connections.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one that I think a lot of us are still figuring out actively. As Nora said, freelancing, especially in the beginning, it is such a grind, right? It feels like it's just constant work because it's not like set 9 to 5, right? You'll get an email from an editor at 6 p.m. on a Friday, and then you spend all weekend thinking about this and whatever. And I think that can lead to burnout really easily, especially when you have so many, again, it's not like you're clocking in a newsroom, you have so many different streams of income, so many different types of journalism you could be doing, right? For me, I've got cartoons, I've got reporting, I've got fact-checking, all lined up at once, and that can make it really hard to sort of focus on just like one thing and focusing on honing your craft. But I think, the people in this room have the advantage of being young, being students, and obviously you can hone your craft at any age, but I think especially before you're sort of at the point where you're relying for 100% of your income on freelance journalism, because that's the point where like it becomes hard, you're just pitching, you're just working. But before that, I think, you know, if it's just kind of like you're doing freelance journalism as a fun side thing or like supplementary income, pitch things that you really like and care about and spend time writing them and making sure that they're as good as they can be and really hone your craft that way. I don't know if that makes sense. And yeah, I'm curious to hear what Nora has to say about that too.
Yeah, Nora, what would you add?
So you think burnout's bad now? We have kids, or you're in the hospital and you're dealing with that, and your whole life is hanging on the thread of your freelance work. You know, I have a friend who was one of the pioneers in YouTube videos in Canada, and he was like, my father ended up in long-term care, and my entire world was over because he was his primary caregiver. You know, so I think that like burnout in general is a problem because we have very bad tools to manage burnout in general. So like, put away your phone, really put away your phone, really try to stay offline as much as you can, really have hobbies that allow you to not always be focusing on work. Don't ruin friendships over a job. I know people that would backstab friends to try and get that really amazing position, and you know, 10 years later, they're back to being friends, and that first job didn't matter. So don't, you know, really calm like the feelings of jealousy and like inadequacy, right? Everyone's a fucking idiot in this industry, and so if you aren't, you are already head and shoulders above it. It's hard for me to not be in the room because I don't know if this is a room full of like, you know, like deans that I should be saying this to. I know it's not.
Here, I'll turn the laptop around so you can see your audience.
Oh, hey everyone! Wow. So yeah, like you know, you have to find ways to avoid burnout in general in life because you know it literally only gets worse, right? I'm literally cooking supper right now for a kid who I'm told would not touch the TV tonight, and here I am not being able to police that, right? It's like, oh my god, I'm gonna walk the door in like 20 minutes. So yeah, and I haven't eaten since noon, right? Like whatever, I'll stop complaining. And so have those personal things to keep you not burnt out. In the freelancing world, here's a couple of things you have to remember. There's no loyalty to anybody. If you're not related to anybody in this industry, it's going to be way harder than someone who is the son or the daughter of someone that worked at the Globe and Mail. And that's a reality, and that sucks. And it's really easy to get bitter about that, and you should try to not be bitter about that because that's how Canada works. And if you leave journalism and become a lawyer, or become a teacher, or become a marine technician, you'll find out that parents of children, they all stay in the same industry, in every industry in Canada, not just journalism. That's how this country works. It sucks. And so if you are an outsider and you're in that grind and you're like, why can't I get like this story landed? Why can't I? You know, you have to make sure that you realize that there are certain things that are out of your control. And so it is not your inadequacy, it's not your lack of intelligence, it's not your lack of skill necessarily. It's probably also that there are a million other people doing the exact same thing that you are. And if you can set your perspective or your hopes a little bit anticipating that, then hopefully you can deal with the burnout of constantly pitching. That being said, I'm 39, okay? I know I look like I'm 27, I'm 39. And that's also a joke because I don't look like I'm 27 anymore. And I am so sick of pitching. Like, I hate it. I hate pitching, and it's like, get your own ideas. You are the editor. Get the like, you tell me what to write. You know, I'm the writer. I'm not the editor. You're the one with the job. You tell me what to write. And after years of doing this, you really do feel like you're just bleeding yourself dry. If you start to do journalism that's about yourself, then you really are bleeding yourself dry. You have to be really careful about that. And so for me, what I've done is it's like, one, this is not my main source of income. I have a part-time job that is completely different, that I love, that makes me travel all over Canada, that allows me to do the writing and not get paid all that much for it, which is critical because then I can say yes to, you know, making $200 off of an opinion piece, which is not enough, but I can say yes to that. And then, you know, you have the people who you know will give you an instant no or an instant yes. That's wonderful because it's like, if I have a shot with this editor, they will be in touch with me right away. And if it's an instant no, then it's like, whatever, no big deal, I haven't wasted any time. If you're putting out pitches into the ether and you don't know if they're ever going to get back to you, always set your alarm, call them back in 2 days, be like, hey, what do you think? Is this yes or no? So that you're not always like stressed out and sitting on top of something that you can't get out. And then also know when to cut your losses with an editor or cut your losses with an organization. I was pitching to the Globe and to get to the blacklist. But I was pitching to them anyway, and every one of my pitches had to go to the editorial board for approval, which is not normal. And I'm in touch with other writers, and like, is this normal? They're like, never happened to me. And then finally, I'm like, fuck the Globe and Mail, trash paper, not interested in trying to write for myself, keep reading it. I had this subscription until they canceled publication circulation east of Montreal, whatever, that's a whole other thing that I can't stand. But they won't go with me, so why, who cares? Screw them. Same with CBC, same with the Toronto Star, it's just like, there's places that I'm just not gonna waste my time with anymore. And there's places like the Walrus, if I pitch, I know I'm gonna be in a world of hell with their fact checking. And so it's like, okay, are you sure you want this? Pitch to the Walrus. Okay, now I'm in a world of hell. Fine, it's okay. So you gotta measure yourself and have those expectations really tempered when you're in this world.
Thank you so much. I feel like I need to turn you around so I can see the kind of reactions that you're getting from the audience. I'm sure you don't need to see more of my face, so I'm flipping you, Nora. Okay. That is wonderful. I think, I would also be very curious to know about how you split your time between different projects, because I noticed that in the burnout conversation, all of you do multiple different things. Nora, you have your podcast, you also do freelancing, you split your time between fact-checking and all of your other pursuits. Do you think that would help in burnout, just kind of as an addendum?
I mean, I think, sort of branching off something that Nora said, it's really helpful to have a firm source of income, a reliable thing where you're like, I know that this is going to pay me enough to live comfortably. And when I first started doing freelance journalism, I think I had this sort of idea that probably a lot of people have in their heads, where I was like, I'm gonna write these big glossy magazine features every week, I'm gonna be on my Carrie Bradshaw, whatever. And the reality is that that's really hard, right? Because those pieces, they don't always pay very well, and like Nora said, it's hard. Shadowing just doesn't publish that much. There's not that many opportunities to do that in Canada. And then once you do, there's the fact checking, and it's a long process. You generally don't get paid until the piece comes out. It's great and it's wonderful, but it's not reliable income. So for me, I was doing that full time for a while. It was exhausting, and I did feel burnt out, and I felt really disillusioned. And then when I started fact checking, which for me has been such a I think it's a sort of part of journalism that oftentimes people think can be tedious or not great, but it's important, and there are so many fact checking opportunities at so many different publications and different media organizations, and it's really rewarding work. I really enjoy it. It pays well. It pays consistently. And so once I got into that, the burnout, when you're thinking less about okay, am I going to pay rent this month? Am I going to be able to start paying off my student loans this month? Because that's coming. It becomes a lot easier. And so, yeah, I think for me, it's just a balance of finding work I really enjoy, that's fulfilling, and work that pays me. And it's important to get paid.
Totally agreed. Nora, would you like to say something on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Everything Gabrielle just said is totally right on. I think, one of the things I see among younger people these days is sometimes there is not a good line between those projects, and those projects all get mixed together. So it's you go to the coffee shop, and you do your work in the coffee shop, and that's and then you start mixing things together, projects get dropped, or projects get merged. For me, if I didn't have a space where I do my work, which is in my apartment, I have my own office, which is a room that I go to do work. I do not work in cafes. I could work in cafes if I was doing a really creative kind of writing, that way I could just sit there and think and write, but it's too frenetic. I need to be in my own space, and it's this is my work. And so the work that I'm paid to do, and so I'm the editor of the Canadian Association of Labour Media, and so I do labor training for people all over Canada and unions, big and small. And my COM work, I know it's an amazing acronym, COM, C-A-L-M. We own com.ca, by the way, and there's a lot of folks that are very, very interested in buying that URL from us. We're always no. But it's the kind of job that it's driven by tasks. And so it's oh, I have an email, I'll answer that email. Oh, I have to enter this information, or oh, I have to make this job and maybe sometimes on work hours. I mean, don't tell my boss that, but it's okay. I mean, it's similar work, right? And then the journalism and writing work is, you have to, this took me a while to figure out, what are your best conditions for writing? So I usually, like, my day is daily news, right? I have a daily news podcast every morning at 10 minutes in the morning, comes out 9 o'clock Eastern time. It was an insane thing for me to start. People like it too much for me to end. This is going to probably be what kills me. But I do daily news writing or recording from 8 a.m. until 9 a.m. And then from 9 a.m. until 11 a.m., I'm doing comm work, I'm shit posting on Twitter, I'm trying to get the thing out for, like, the podcast on all the stupid social media platforms that I don't understand, like fucking Instagram is like, what the hell, I don't get this. And then by about 11:30, I'm like, okay, maybe I can start to write. Now this is assuming that I'm not under the gun with a deadline. If I'm under the gun with a deadline, I'll start writing much earlier. But from 11 o'clock until 4 o'clock is like my prime writing time. And I have a book, like I'm writing a book right now. I'm under a very stupid deadline where I have to write 4,000 words a week for 10 weeks to make my deadline. And so, I mean, that's okay because my COVID book was worse than that, but it's also like stressful because like it's not about COVID and it's, you know, there's other stuff going on. The nice thing about writing a book about COVID during the pandemic, like during the early days of the pandemic was nothing else was going on, right? So now I've got real life is back, writing a book. That's paid me literally nothing, so like don't get into book writing. I just got my royalty check for my last 2 books and it was $101, which is fucking sad. They only started 2020 and 2021. By the way, buy my book, I will make $2 off of it. Well, that's not true. I'll make $2 off the feminist book and nothing off the COVID book because I still haven't cleared the advance. Okay, I guess more expensive to write. And so then you got all this stuff separated, and then for writing, you know, like I do like, you know, 20 minutes of writing or 40 minutes of writing, and then, an email's come in, okay, I'll deal with this person here, and, you know, Bob Reese said something stupid on Twitter, gotta call him an idiot. Okay, now I'm back to writing. Okay, I'm doing my writing, or do my research at the same time, and it's actually great for me, like, maybe you can tell, like, that's the way I live, right? I'm a little bit, like, all over the place, and so maybe that doesn't work for you. Maybe you need something a little more calm and not so frenetic, but I have learned to make that work for me. And then, like, let's say that this happens all the time. This happened last week. I got a call from an editor. This doesn't happen all the time. It should happen more. I got a call from an editor from a publication in the States. Was like, would you like to write about this NDP motion on Palestine? And I was like, would I? Not only would I, but like I've already done a lot of research on it for other stuff, you know, for the videos, for the Daily News podcast. So I can pound out an article for you in an hour. So no problem. Set everything aside, write my article, file it, come back to it, 5 hours later for an edit. Boom, it's out in a day and a half. So you learn how to develop things that work for you. And for sure, I mean, if I burn out, it's probably not going to be because of this schedule. It'll be because of my podcast probably. And also like the other pressures in my life that, you know, that I can't manage as well. Actually, maybe I've said too much.
Okay, wonderful answers. Thank you guys so much. Moving on to a slightly different topic. Obviously a huge part of journalism is figuring out your values, asserting your values in your writing, and seeing how that aligns with the different publications that you work for and the different work that you do. So how do you manage differences in values between you and the outlet that you're working for?
Yeah, I was talking about that a little bit with Susanna earlier. It's interesting, it's tough. I think, you know, as a young journalist, especially when you're starting out, and especially if you don't, you know, come from money. Like if you're doing journalism as a job and you have rent to pay and you have whatever, you don't necessarily have the luxury of being super picky and choosy, right? Like it's just the unfortunate reality that bigger publications also have like bigger budgets for freelancers and can pay you more. And so I think for me it's always been sort of a balance of making sure that when I'm writing, like I do cartoons for the Globe and Mail, and that publication is not a leftist publication, right? But my cartoons are leftist cartoons, and that's like non-negotiable. And when I send them, you know, I have to send them like 3 sketches, and they choose one and they approve, and we have a bit of like back and forth, and you know, like there is kind of like knowing when to put your foot down and to say no, like this is I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to back down from this. I think is important. And I think it can be really scary when you're starting out, but yeah, I don't know. I think you won't always have the luxury of choosing like publications that align perfectly with your values, but if you are in a publication that has politics slightly different from yours, I think it's just a matter of making sure you're not publishing work you're not proud of or happy with.
That's a great answer. Nora?
Yeah, so I have the luxury of not having that choice because no one will publish me if they're right wing, right? I once pitched to the National Post an article about the destruction of the Canadian Federation because they were all like, we're open to all ideas. And the editor at the time was someone I knew from school, and she was like, yeah, we can't publish this. I'm like, you guys are cowards. This is what's going on here. You're cowards. You can't actually publish like real thinking stuff because you're cowards. So fine. And so for me, like, it wasn't as if I could ever just be like, CBC, can you publish this article that I wrote about, like, you know, how the mining industry is cool? Because, like, I couldn't do that. They wouldn't believe me. And I already, at this point, I mean, I made a career for myself as a left-wing journalist from day one, which was limiting, you know? Like, I fought for most of my 20s and into my early 30s to be taken seriously as a journalist. Now, to an extent, I also understand that the industry is complete garbage, and I don't need to be taken seriously by certain people in the industry. But I wanted to make sure that, you know, that my journalism, as Gabrielle said, I can be proud of it, and that it stood up to any other kinds of standards of journalism in Canada. So I haven't had to make that choice because I haven't had tons of offers for places that are evil. The reality, though, in Canada is that there's really few places to write for. You know, I think, like, the most kind of, like, this is totally fine if you choose to do this, but the most kind of limit might be, like, doing content production for, like, banks or other kinds of corporations that you might not like very much. But even there, I mean, I would never do it, but I don't really judge people that do because, you know, even there you can write, like, consumer advice and how to reduce your loan payments and things that actually people really do need advice on. And those kinds of content generation jobs can be a really good, stable place of income. I chose my politics as my place of income, which is the labor movement. And I have no problem with anything that I do in my paid employment. And I'm never going to pitch an article or say yes to an article that I'm not the perfect person to be placed to do it. You know, I was at the Washington Post as a global opinions columnist. There were many times where my editor was like, can you write about this? And it's like, I'm not the best person to write about this. I'm going to find you a good alternative, a good option, and I got, you know, try to get other people to get access to, like, such an amazing platform, right? So, you know, you might come up with some ethical issues. You might, you know, well, certainly if you work for a corporation like CBC, it'll be probably less about your politics and more about just how much, like, bullshit you can take. And if you can take a lot of bullshit, then use that to your advantage and take good jobs that are full of bullshit, which the CBC is totally full of them. But not everyone can deal with that. You know, like, I have great friends who work at the CBC, and they're wonderful. I would not last at that corporation because I would tell my boss to go to hell because that's what I'm like. So, you know, it's about knowing who you are and knowing what your level of shit eating is, and that's just about living in society. And if you can tolerate that, that's great. That's really good. Use that to your advantage. But certainly do not say yes to an article where you're like, I'm not sure about this on the ethical side, because then you're going to write yourself into knots. The article's not going to be authentic, and it's probably not going to be very good either. The most important thing is that there's some sort of passion in what you're writing about. And even if you're, like, passionate about city issues, you can write about snow clearing in a really compelling and interesting way, right? But if you find yourself constantly being thrown stories that you're not interested in, regardless of the politics, you're not going to produce very good writing.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point, and thank you guys both for talking about, like, developing your own journalistic ethic, because I think that's a very big topic for, you know, going freelance, because you are entirely independent and have to create that for yourself. So my next question is about the positives and negatives of freelancing. Obviously, we just talked about the fact that, you know, it's entirely self-created, so you have to determine what you are and are not willing to write about. I would like to know a little bit more about the freedoms that freelancing affords you and the challenges, like how you weigh those and how you navigate those.
Yeah, I mean, Nora sort of mentioned earlier, like, if the CBC offered her a job, she's not sure if she would say yes. And I've had the same conversation with other friends in the industry a lot recently, where I think when I started freelancing, I was like, I'm freelancing until I can find a staff position, and this is like the bridge to a destination. And now I really genuinely think that if I was offered a position in any newsroom, I don't think I would take it because I have enjoyed freelancing so much. It is challenging. I think as far as the cons go, like it's really hard to start freelancing. It's hard to figure out like your client base, to figure out what you're going to do to actually like make money and to live sustainably. It's a grind in the beginning, like that can all be really tough. It's also kind of precarious, right? Like you never know when a client might shutter. I used to fact check for Best Health and Reader's Digest, and then a few months ago we got the email being like, hey guys, like rest in peace to us, stuff. Which those kinds of emails, like they do go out a lot, right? It feels hard. But at the same time, people are always like, I could never freelance, it's so precarious. But is working at a media organization less precarious? Like we just saw so many layoffs on Vice, BuzzFeed News. So I think people limit themselves from freelancing for that reason, but I don't think it's a good reason to limit. I mean, I understand it, but yeah, I think that can be tough in any sort of part of journalism. As far as the pros go, you have control over who you're working with, right? Like, it can be, I have friends who work in newsrooms and they have less choice over what they're writing, and it can be so exhausting because you're not fully in control of your hours. If something happens, if there's a car crash at 7 p.m., you're covering that car crash at 7 p.m. For me, like, if I have an idea for an article at 7 p.m., I can pitch it. I can also play Stardew Valley and go to bed, right? And that, like, it is a lot of freedom, and it's great to be able to fix out my schedule. I suffered a concussion in November. I got in a bike accident, and I've been able to sleep in until 10:30 since, right? It's like I have so much freedom over rest and my own time and my own space, and I think that's really special. And journalism is a grind, whether you're in a newsroom or from home, and I just think I've been given a lot more, freedom and diversity in my work because of the fact that I'm freelance, for sure.
Yeah, I actually have a follow-up question on that. I was wondering if there were any particular jobs or experiences, you mentioned your concussion, that like have drawn you more into freelancing, that have made you like appreciate the role, or like have made it seem like your chosen career opportunity.
Oh, I have a very good one, which is that, I can't believe I didn't mention this before. Yeah, so actually when I first started freelancing, like things were going really well when I was starting to do pretty well. And then I was working in a newsroom for a little bit. And while I was at that newsroom, I developed sort of a chronic pain issue, a nerve issue. And I lost the ability to type. For like 2 years, I just couldn't really type very much. I can type a little bit more now, but it's still rough. And when I was at that newsroom when that started, it was so hard because I had to write an article every day. I had to go in and write an article with voice to text, which in a newsroom is like, it was very annoying for everyone. And that was really tough. And since then, I've been so grateful for being freelance because if I'm having a bad day with my hands, which still does happen, I can just, unless I want a super hard deadline, I can take like the afternoon off and go back to work in the evening, right? My schedule is so flexible, which I think, when you are disabled or when you have health issues, goes a really long way. I can go to a physio appointment at noon on a Tuesday. No one can stop me from doing that. It's awesome. Do I have the health care? No. But like that's a sacrifice that I'm willing to accept. And I think, in the past few years, it's been such a big shift going from typing to using voice to text, back to typing, whatever. And I don't think I would have been able to do that if I was working full-time in a newsroom. I think I probably wouldn't be a journalist anymore.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. I think that's a common feeling about freelancing is the freedom and having a bit of sort of a self-determination about how you execute your work. Nora, are you ready to add?
That's all good. Obviously, not having a pension is a huge problem. Like a huge problem. Like I don't really know what I'm going to do in my old age, and want to be able to write until I die, but like, you know, maybe I won't be able to. And so that's a huge thing that sucks that we don't have. Gabrielle, I should mention, if you're curious about checking out health plans, the Canadian Freelance Union has a wide range of health plans for freelancers that you can pay into.
And actually, earlier when you first mentioned that, I was like, I should ask about that.
We do, I mean, you have to look at the plan to see if it's right, anything's right for you, but this is something that we do offer for freelancers, so I'm contractually obliged to mention that as the president of the organization.
Good work, guys.
But yeah, I mean, the freedom is, as I say, I didn't have a choice, and because I was such, I was so never going to fit into the Toronto media scene when I was in university. I got into the student union instead. I was elected. I was elected for 3 years full time as a VP education and then the president. And then I had to finish my degree somehow, and I went back into editing and journalism with the Ryerson Free Press. And it wasn't until my partner got hired in Quebec City that I was like, oh my god, I have to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. He's a professor, and so we were ready to go anywhere, and actually the place that we were most likely going to go is to Holland, and so I was like, I will never have a normal job in Holland, like what the hell, like, I mean, I like the Dutch, but it's so weird, right? So I was for like 2 or 3 years, like, thinking, okay, like, maybe I could do like international radio, English language reporting for like the Deutsche Welle News Service, or radio fucking whatever Europe, like that sounds so like exotic, cool, right? Of course you get hired there, we have to be Quebec City of all place to live when you don't speak French, right? And then I have kids, so for freelancing now as a parent, I mean it's ideal because like yes, all of those appointments I can just drop everything and I can deal with whatever kid stuff that I have, and my kids are now 10, but in the beginning, I mean they were sick all the time. My one kid was hospitalized all the time, so it was just like, okay, I'll just go back to the hospital for a couple of days, like black hole of being in the hospital and the world outside the world doesn't exist. Okay, we're gonna do this again. And freelancing was, I don't even know how I would have done that without having that flexibility. I did not work a full 5-day week the year that my kids were 1 to 2, because they were so sick. So, yeah, tons and tons of benefits. I think though, like, you have to be realistic, it absolutely is not for everybody. If you don't have discipline, which is like, God bless you if you don't, because discipline is overrated. But if you don't have discipline, you're not probably going to cut it as a freelancer, because you really have to be disciplined. You have to not miss deadlines, ever. Like, you could maybe miss a deadline here or there, but really, it can't be something that, like, is built into what you do. You have to be very good with deadlines, you can't be stressed out by deadlines. And I know people that just are, I think back to J school where, like, half the class would cry before our deadlines. It was just like, that's just who they were, and a lot of them were like, this sucks, this is not the world that I want to be in. And that's totally, totally fine. But if you're good with discipline, you're good with deadlines, you're good with arranging your own space, the benefits far outweigh the drawbacks. Though maybe ask me at 60 years old when I'm staring down at complete fucking poverty, that maybe it wasn't a good idea. But I'm not there yet, right? And I am making enough money to save money. So, I mean, save not that much money, but, and I have a partner, that helps, right? Very rich, actually. You can do that. Rich, but you've got a steady academic job, so very, very good. So that definitely is I mean, spend time on yourself to get a good, like, partner or 2 or 3 partners that have money. That really, really helps with the crises that we're all in.
Okay. Novel solutions to issues with being a journalist. Polygamy and marrying rich. Okay. That is a great answer. Thank you, Nora. I have one more question for both of you, and it is about Substack journalism. But I think we can talk more broadly about maybe credibility. So, like, Substack is obviously like a self-publishing platform where you have to kind of assure readers that you are, a credible source that they can trust and listen to if you're not affiliated with a larger media corporation. So the broader question, of course, there is, how do you distinguish yourself from misinformation? How do you, create yourself as a credible source? Do you have any insight into that?
Nora might be better at answering this than me, because I don't have a Substack, or I don't have platforms where I'm publishing say is that with freelance journalism, it's really interesting. If you're writing for a magazine, say you're writing for Chatelaine, you're writing for The Walrus, your stuff is getting fact checked, right? You submit it, it gets edited, it goes to a fact checker. The fact checker calls your mom to make sure that you really did that thing you were for, and like that's the way that works. If you're writing for a newspaper, that doesn't happen. It's on you as the writer to fact check it. That distinction is very bizarre to me. I don't know why one is fact checked and it's not. But I think it ends up being that if you're freelancing a lot for newspapers, you get good at fact checking yourself and making sure that your own work is credible. Because the fear of having something published and then it happens.
Sorry, Nora's kid popped up. Sorry, please continue.
No, that was great. Wow.
I'm really sorry about that. I'm trying to get you at the summer table to eat.
That's okay.
I can hear all of this though. I'm totally in the dark.
Yeah, I think the fear of having a piece come out and then it has a retraction because like you got something wrong is really big, right? And those things happen, but it's really scary to have them happen. And I don't know, I think over time as you're doing journalism, I don't know what I'm saying. Yeah, I think you get used to fact checking yourself, and I think I would be hesitant to start like something where you're doing reporting without the backing of, first of all, publications, and second of all, their lawyers, before you're at that point where you know you can fact check yourself well.
Okay, that's great advice, kind of like moving into it gradually and kind of like gaining confidence. Nora, do you have anything to contribute?
Yeah. So, actually, hilarious story. I wrote a feature for The Walrus on Christmas carols, and they fact-checked the question whether or not I was lying or not lying about having the Oxford Book of Carols on the piano when I was a kid, so they called my mom, and my mom was like, the hell? And I'm like, it's very thorough, Mom, just say yes. Oh my god. Yeah, one of my biggest concerns when I was just starting off was, and this was just like a sign of the times at that time, which was that I would be seen as a blogger and not a real journalist. And so I always stayed away from blogging and really tried to make sure that the work that I was doing was being edited by someone. And at the time, I was able to do a lot of work with Rabble. I had a column at Rabble and someone always edited me there. And then I moved on and, Huffington Post, I had a column with Huffington Post for a while, someone edited me there. And then, then I got into like a world where I would say like, no, I'm not blogging anymore, this is absolutely journalism. I don't know if I had tried to go to Substack at that stage of my career, if I would have had that confidence that's so necessary to know to have faith in like your ability to tell a story and get the facts right. Because, it's one thing if you're a serial plagiarist. Serial plagiarists have a problem, and they can't help themselves, and they need to lead journalism. And it's one of those things where, like, they're not common, but the first time you meet a serial plagiarist, you're like, how do you exist? That's so embarrassing. And then they just don't understand, right? And then you realize, like, they shouldn't probably be in this world. Everyone else is, like, doing their best to get the facts right, but you're not necessarily gonna get all the facts right, because maybe you read something wrong. Maybe you added a zero to make a billion to be 10 billion or something, or maybe you misread the corporate documents, and an editor would catch all of that, and you're on your own, and you're stuck with just trying to figure it out. I would suggest that, Substack is a really great place to practice writing, and you can practice probing issues that you really care about, because it can be a really fun place where you might get a little bit of money, depending on how you build it up, and you can do a bit more of the free form, like, creative writing that actually really will help your journalism. So not trying to do hard news necessarily on Substack. Now, for me, I actually started my Substack because I had breaking news from the Ministry, the Workplace Health and Safety Board in Ontario, and I wanted to break that news to Maclean's. And Maclean's has so cut back on everything. It's like not even a place I think about anymore. But Maclean's was a place that certainly, when I was writing about COVID all the time, I was able to pitch and got several stories in Maclean's. The editor there was like, Nora, we're about to go to press. We just lost all these workers. There's no way I can consider this pitch until January 15th. And it was like December 21st. And so I was like, I know the timing sucks. The ministry did this intentionally, so the story was buried. And at that moment I was like, I'm going to Substack because I can't wait for McLean's. I can't hope that they have space for me anymore. And this has to get out. And I am a journalist. I mean, this is going to be my Substack, and I have built up enough of my credibility for people to want to follow what I write. Now on Substack, I mean, it's not a huge Substack, but by Canadian standards, I think I have, I make $11,000 a year off of it, which is like great, right? Like that is not nothing. That is actually more than I was making with the Maple, which is good because I left the Maple because I didn't like how I was being treated. And then I lost CBC because we woke up one morning and they're like, bad news, your segment's been canceled. Sorry, everybody. And then Canada Land went fucking bananas. So I don't know if I'm going to go back to Canada. So like in a matter of a flash, I lost $15,000 of revenue in 2024 over what I was expecting from the last previous years. So Substack for me has been a really critical stopgap, but it is definitely true that writing hard news on Substack is a bit of a difficult thing. And honestly, like as a journalist, I don't feel that comfortable writing hard news all the time on Substack. Even if I'm releasing documents, let's say, like I was with that time with the death rate information for COVID, I still put it out as, oh my god, everybody check out this data I got, and not like, Mary was sitting at her desk when COVID whipped it by her nose. She died 4 days later. You know, you write completely different. And so you kind of have to like experiment and see what works for you, but for me, Substack is more of a creative outlet for me to engage with people on interesting kind of topics. And then when I wrote for Truth Out, I was like, oh, of course, right now I'm writing for an audience with like, and then this, and it's a different kind of writing.
Okay, that is wonderful, thank you. Do you have anything about misinformation? Like, do you think that ties into...
Oh, yeah, right. So no, I think that if you have a reputation to be a credible journalist, then the misinformation piece kind of disappears as a problem. You should always be writing and striving to meet journalism's, core tenets. Balance, fairness, accuracy, right? Regardless of the politics that you're writing about, those tenets are really, really, really critical. Balance is going to look different, but there's still, you still want to make sure that the piece it doesn't read like AI-generated propaganda or something, right? Like, you still have to do journalism. And, feedback from people is really important. Having friends in the industry who might be able to say, what the hell is this? Or like, oh my god, I screwed it up. Really, really important. But I never felt, for me, the world is so black and white that for me, like, to even imagine that I'd be dipping my toes in the world of misinformation is like completely not possible. If there's something that I'm a little bit like, oh, I'm not sure about that, I'm not going to write about it. Right? The stuff that I write about is stuff that I'm really sure that I have a beat on what's going. And I'd be very curious if anyone had ever saw anything that I've written was like, actually, this kind of gets into the misinformation world. But I certainly haven't had that accusation leveled against me by anyone who's like not a Twitter bot.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. That concludes all of the questions that we had for you, but I was wondering if anyone in the audience has specific questions for either of our panelists. Yes.
I'm gonna pass you the mic.
Hi, I'm Celine. I was wondering, when you start off as a freelance journalist, like how do you sort of like form an identity and just have your own kind of brand and your own ideas and like be identified? Because like obviously people that are hiring are kind of looking for people, but then when you start off it's kind of hard because, as you guys said, you guys are just kind of trying to get the jobs that are offered to you and kind of do as much as possible just to start building your name.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Oh, sorry. do you want to go ahead?
No, Gabrielle, you go first.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for asking that, Celine. I think in the beginning, I was finding that, a lot of people will tell you the best way to start being a freelance journalist is to find a specific beat. So one topic, and you're always reporting on this one thing. And I'm sure that can probably be effective, For me in the beginning, I was just pitching things that I was really interested in, and that worked, right? I think, especially in the beginning when you're sending pitches, people won't necessarily look at like your whole profile, like everything you've written, but they'll look at your bylines, right? So you're able to say, I've written about this for this publication, this for this publication. You know, ideally it's not like you're writing about sports one day and like politics the next, you know, like within the same world. But if you're writing sort of broadly about culture, broadly about health, or just broadly about things that interest you, I think that's a really good place to start. Like I would try not to pigeonhole yourself too early. For me, I'm not that old, but I am old enough that when I was starting freelance, Twitter was still a pretty good place to sort of get your foot in the door as a journalist. It was like pre-Elon Musk ownership, right? And there was a lot of networking happening there, and I think there might still be. But I think I got really lucky in that I was there at the right time as people were still like hiring freelancers from Twitter. Maybe that's worth trying, or some sort of social media. And it is true, I think, you know, people are of two minds about this. In J school, apparently you're often taught like, to stay off Twitter, stay off of social media. But, you know, oftentimes that's how most of my relationships with editors have been built up, right? It is like people who I found them on social media, or they found me on social media. And I think that can be a really good way to advertise yourself. That and having like a decent website. But otherwise, just pitch things that you're interested in and hope that, you know, something comes of that.
Yeah. I think it's really weird, right? Because like I came to age before Twitter was what Twitter became, and you know, I joined Twitter to report on the G20 in Toronto, and by then it had been around for 2 years, but you know, social media was not what it became and then what it is today. So I think, you know, first of all, I would definitely think less about your brand and more about your voice. Because it's like a brand can be anything, you can make yourself into anything. You're not likely going to be the one they choose the pitch over because they like your brand more than someone else's brand doing the same kind of thing as you are. You're going to be able to set yourself apart by having the voice, the chops to actually do the assignment, and that just takes like really boring, grind-like stuff, cold calling people, showing up to industry events, applying to jobs, doing fellowships, meeting people, like, you know, especially if you're not related to anybody, I know this is just so cute, especially if you're not related to anybody, you have to do that work, you have to network. You can't assume that someone's just gonna like even look at your bylines. In my pitches, I'm not sure I've ever sent anything I've written before previously. I'm just like, hey, I want to write this, and I cut to the chase, and in that, someone can tell that I have many options. I know how it works. You know, I don't need to prove who I am because I am at a point in my career where I don't need to do that anymore. But you know, you have to make those personal connections, because if you don't have those, then you don't stand out at all. And it is through this job, and then this job, and then this person, and looking out for calls online, and finding places like, if you're not a member, if you're a woman or non-binary person, you can join the Canadian Binders. It's a really great place on Facebook. It's a secret group. Men in the room. And the Canadian Binders is a great place for networking and seeing names and seeing who's doing what within Canadian freelancing and journalism. It's not just freelancers, but I mean, it's like the place to be. And knowing those kinds of locations is, I think, probably going to do a lot more for you than figuring out how to write the pitch in the right way.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Any other questions in the room? Yes. We'll just move the mic.
Hi, I'm Matthew, editor-in-chief of the Tribune. I'm so lovely to see you again, Nora. I have 3 questions.
Ooh.
I'm sorry. One for you, Gabby. I was wondering if you could speak specifically to just people who are interested in freelancing for more creative submissions, whether photos or illustrations. And then Nora, I had 2 questions for you. One, I was wondering how you specifically deal with the abuse and harassment that I know you face online, and kind of the lack of protection that there is in freelancing. And I was wondering if you could also speak to navigating the balance of freelancing, but then also the institutionalization of some leftist papers like Rabble, like the Maple. So I was wondering if you could speak about abuse, harassment, and then that divide between freelancing, leftist organizations, and then Gabby, I was just wondering about creative freelancing as well.
Yeah, I do think, you know, as a freelancer, it is really cool because you can pitch these like multimedia things, and you can pitch, I think, things that you might not be able to do if you're just like a desk reporter at a newspaper. For me, it's interesting, in the beginning, my sort of illustrations and cartooning work were fully separate from my journalism, and they still usually are, right? It's like, I do cartoons, and I fact check, and I write, and they're all different. Oftentimes, I'm a writer and a cartoonist, and it's like, okay, so you do journalism, and you do cartoons about it, which, not always, but sometimes, right? I do think, in the past years, I've had a few cool opportunities to do like a written piece that's accompanied by illustrations I've done, or a written piece that has an accompanying cartoon, and that's been really cool. I think editors are becoming more and more open to multimedia stuff and whatever they can do to like grab someone's attention. So yeah, I think for that, it really is just a matter of like, if you have an idea, even if it's kind of weird, even if the publication hasn't really done something like that before, to be like, by the way, could I draw something for this? Or by the way, I've taken photos, or I have audio files, or whatever it is that I think would go well with this piece, and doing that. There have also been, like, I wrote in 2020 a piece for the New York Times about sex work, where the editor was like, what if we also did a video component for this? And it ended up becoming a really cool, I'm not a video person, but we had like a freelance video person come on, and we worked together, and like with the same sources, and it can be really awesome to do that sort of collaborative multimedia stuff, because I wouldn't have known how to do any of the stuff that Sean was doing, and you know, he's not a writer, but together we did that. And so I think just being open to doing different kinds of multimedia stuff like that is really exciting, and yeah, just pitching it, or even being like, if you've noticed that a publication has done a really cool multimedia thing, being like, I'd love to do this pitch, also could we do that again, or could we do something like this for that? I don't know if that answers your question, but okay.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Nora, did you want to speak on dealing with harassment?
Yeah. Okay, so it doesn't bother me at all. It doesn't bother me for a whole bunch of reasons. It's irritating to just always have like the worst comments on all of my shit. It's very, very, very irritating. But on a personal level, it's kind of like, okay, like, oh wow, another person hates me. Okay, like, as if I care, which I don't at all. I think that it could be harder if you were worried that the abuse and harassment was like going to, can you sit down? No, like, it's cute but not cute. Sit down and eat. And just take broccoli, please take broccoli. Sit. If you choke, I will kill you. You know, if I was worried that I was going to lose a job over the swarming or the mobbing, my mental health would be far different. You know, I'm now at a point where almost every public event that I do is threatened. Literally. And I'm like, there's like 5 in the last 4 months that have all been threatened. And threatened by far-right people, then there was threatened by other people, and it's been very irritating. And that sucks, because then I have to like say to a venue, like, please don't cancel it, they're not serious, no one's gonna show up and kill us all. Like, this is empty threats, right? That really does suck. And to just deal with it, you have to just have a sense of humor and a really good support base and a life completely outside of this world, and not much, well, no ego or like full ego. I'm not sure which one it is, but like, these people will not change my opinion of myself, and they won't change other people's opinion of me who matter. So the people who I respect, the people who I work with. So I mean, I could probably talk for 5 hours about the whole online harassment stuff. It is very clear though, like a lot of it seems going back to 2016 when I was on the National to talk about 2017. I was on the National to talk about rising far-right hatred, and someone put a complaint against me to the ombudsman, and CBC was like, we're never inviting this person back, even though I had been regularly on different CBC shows. I can see people in the Conservative Party running these kinds of campaigns, and so for me, I get very despaired over that, and it is a bit despairing to know that, like, this party that controls government 1 out of every 2 times in this country, like, really has it out for me. But it's also a badge of honor. Like, they totally can eat so much shit. I just love how much they hate me. It made covering the Conservative Convention very annoying because I was kicked out and I was banned from it, and they had a cop, like, push me around, and I was like, what are you doing? Why are you touching me? He's all like, what are you doing, man? This is so weird. And so that sucks, and then I had to, like, report from the lobby at the Hilton, but, you know, thankfully I had enough data on my phone to burn through all of my data to cover the convention. So as long as it doesn't interfere too much with my work, it's okay, but, like, it is the reason I'm shut out of the Globe and Mail. It was the reason I was shut out of Maclean's until Maclean's was bought by St. Joseph's Communications, because Rogers had it with me, and I found out later on that it was very much related to Rogers, which is also why, like, Chatelaine and Fashion or Elle, I forget which one, wouldn't touch me, and then all of a sudden they were sold, and all of a sudden I could write for them again. So it's when the harassment is real and has material impacts on me that it really does suck, but by and large it's just noise. On the question of independent media, I mean, that's a whole other huge conversation in Canada. I struggle with how serious some of the independent papers, the independent media are, like, serious in terms of the journalism, serious in terms of, like, doing things properly. The Maple is an excellent, but it's just 2 guys, right? And it's like, okay, do we need more 2 white guys running stuff? Like, no, we don't. But they're good. But I just, like, I was getting my pitches at the Maple rejected, and I was like, hey guys, no offense, but are you kidding me? I'm out of here. After, like, 8 months of me struggling with this. So, and I was a columnist. So it's just, like, you know, not understanding how journalism works in my mind. They had different opinions. It was totally fine. We had a difference of opinion. And that was it. And I left. I left my column at the Maple. For the Rabble, it was always like, it was not serious. And despite the lot of effort of very excellent people over the years, they never, in my iteration round, because it was much before me, it never did journalism that I felt was, like, real journalism that's going to go toe-to-toe with the Canadian press, where it's always going to be day late, it's always going to not hide a bias very well, it's always going to kind of, like, tout a certain line that I can predict, right? And that's an institutional problem there. So, but otherwise, I mean, it's also in a renaissance of alternative media right now, and that's wonderful, and the fact that Ravel's still there means you still have a place to write, so that's great too, that's not the worst thing either. And, I don't care if you're hungry. You wrote that on a piece of paper to tell me that. Broccoli. My kid, who doesn't like writing at all, broke his rule and wrote, I'm not hungry, and held up a sign to me. So anyway, yeah. So the independent media world is good. There's a lot of really good new ones, but it does always suffer from a legitimacy question, and you can see the difference between someone like Chris Curtis, who's got a lot of experience in mainstream media, doing what he does at the Rover, and, like, a new startup that is, like, run by a lot of, like, young journalists. And it's not that that's bad, it's just that there's a culture and an approach to journalism that is really hard to transmit if you're not from that generation of, like, being in the newsroom together and doing that kind of work, which doesn't exist anymore. And so the world has to change. And then the other side of that is then you have TikTok. And TikTok's a whole other world where really you actually can do way more than I can do to talk about news on that platform. And that might be where you think about going ahead. Someone like Rachel Gilmore has turned that platform into something that works very, very well for her. You have to be a certain kind of person for that. But, you know, I also then think of someone like Christo Alvalis, who's probably, like, one of Canada's most watched YouTubers. His YouTube videos have, like, hundreds of thousands of views, and he pivoted only to American news. It's like, you know, you do what you can to get by, and that breeds a kind of creativity.
Cool. Great questions. Great answers. Thank you guys so much. Is there any other questions in the room? No?
1 minute. If anyone has a question, speak now or hold your peace. Going once, going twice.
Okay. then thank you guys so much for being here with us. We really appreciate having your perspectives, and thank you for your support of the Tribune and your knowledge on alternative journalism. We really appreciate it.
Find me online, and I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Do you want to do closing remarks? Sam? No.
Okay, just before you all leave, I'm just gonna do a quick closing remarks. I want to thank all of you for coming today to the 10th annual Tribune Media and Journalism Conference. It's really such an honor to get to run an event like this. So I really do want to thank the staff of the Tribune who put this together, my valiant conference planners. I appreciate all of you so much. Thank you to all the speakers. Gabby, thank you for sticking out the whole day. I appreciate you starting off with a dynamite panel and ending us with another dynamite panel. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Yeah, and to all of our speakers, I really hope if you guys were able to see some of the other stuff or just came for the panel tonight that you really came and learned something about alternative media. The Tribune is really, although we're at an institutional place within McGill, we really have been trying to learn and build a chorus of voices within our paper. With that, I wanted to announce a change to the Tribune. It's a change that we've been working on for a couple of years. It's the anti-oppressive mandate. So I'm just going to read that out for you to let you hear where the Tribune stands. And this is the mandate. It will be published soon, but I'll give you a special sneak peek. The Tribune is an independent, student-run newspaper that covers stories of interest and impact in the McGill community. McGill has no journalism program, and we strive to make the Tribune a place of learning for all journalists, whether reporters, commentators, illustrators, photojournalists, or sports analysts. As both journalists and community members ourselves, we are immersed in and affected by the events we cover, and we are committed to working closely with activists, organizers, and students to call for change. We acknowledge that every article we produce is published on the unceded land of the Ganagahaga, and that the violent histories of settler colonial institutions like McGill University must inform both the writing of this mandate and every action we take at the Tribune. This mandate is written in the midst of a transitional period for the Tribune. We write this document to reaffirm our commitment to liberation and anti-oppression after the publication of our Statement of Changes in 2020 and our name change in 2023. Black, Indigenous, and Palestinian students and students of color on campus have repeatedly shown us the limits of our traditional reporting, and their long-standing contributions to our paper have guided us here. We cannot risk taking the progress we've made for granted. We will not simply mirror the mainstream media. We must anchor ourselves in the unique culture of dissent and protest that flourishes on university campuses. We reaffirm our commitment to recognizing what stories we have not told, encouraging young journalists to carry forward the project of anti-oppression, and ultimately working toward a better future. Oppression is the exercise of power to silence, exclude, and disenfranchise individuals outside of that power. Oppression is built into and continuously reproduced within institutions, including our government, the university, and our paper itself. We see our commitment to anti-oppression as a commitment to actively challenging oppression in all of its forms, while building more sustainable, equitable, and accessible spaces for students, to center anti-oppression in our coverage, our editorials, our hiring, and our workplace practices. We write in the midst of a climate crisis, ongoing genocides, rising white supremacy, fascism, imperialism, unjust policing and surveillance, and the ripple effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. As a newspaper, we must call out and expose the many ways that oppression influences these crises with the hope that unity, awareness, and action can help achieve a more just future. To this end, we have covered and will continue to energetically cover labor organizing, indigenous struggles against settler colonialism, feminisms, 2S LGBTQIA+ activism, and the environmental movement, among many, many others. We see this mandate as a jumping-off point and site of accountability, as a document we will return to time and time again, and as a challenge to ourselves to continuously grow and improve. To begin, the Tribune will enact policies to make space for Black, Indigenous, racialized, 2S LGBTQIA+, and disabled writers and creatives, to ground ourselves in community struggles, and to empower students to create change on our campus. Throughout our reporting, we will center care, listen to community members, and build relationships with local activists. Curiosity, energy, and compassion will drive this mandate's vision, and we are excited to continue working toward change within the university and beyond. That is our anti-oppressive mandate. Thank you all for coming. And after party at Bar Molly.
Narrowly square.
Gabby, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
So chocolate. Thanks for sticking around all day. Thank you. Yeah, and your flowers are in the little vase over there.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
I went to the museum.
Oh.
The dinosaur bone.
Oh wow. Yeah. You had a whole field trip out of it. Well, I'm glad you had fun.
I really did.
And today was like an eventful day to be on campus. Like
It was nice outside. I got a hot dog.
it's a total McGill experience.
It's our hot dog.
All right, well, thanks for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you guys so much for inviting me.
Really?
It was really nice.
That's so sweet.
Best way to reach you.
Yeah, the best way to reach me. Okay. My email is Role, D-R-O.
We're done.
I'm asking because I know
Sorry, Gabrielle.
It'll be on the TV.
Yeah, so I saw where it's almost like it took a long time to spell out.
Yeah, I did. I'll just get it.
Awesome. Yeah.